The Lord's Taverners is the UK's leading youth cricket and disability sports charity, and I'm very proud to support their work. We're laying the foundations for a positive future by building inclusive communities, breaking down barriers, and empowering disadvantaged and disabled young people. We provide a lifeline for some of the most at-risk communities in the UK and tackle issues such as knife crime, unemployment, radicalisation, and also isolation, something that we're all feeling right now. But without our programmes, many of our participants would experience this all year round. If you want to help our work, you can make a donation by following the links on screen. Well, hello, I'm Miles Jupp, and I'm joined currently by one of my children who's just stealing some scrap paper. And I'm also joined by RoryBremner. How are you, Rory?
I'm fine. I love one of my children. Was the name didn't immediately spring to your mind?
No, I know exactly who. I know exactly who it was.
I love the Jacob Rees-Mogg thing of when you have 6 children, you just give up and call the 6th one the Sixtus.
Yeah. Well, we're not.
I think Boris could take a leaf from that book.
He must be the I've done a few things a bit like this recently, and everyone's always started by saying, "How are you?" But I thought I might ignore that.
Yes.
And just assume that you're fine.
I'm okay. Yes, I'm not on a ventilator. I'm okay. But yes, that's the thing, because we're not important really, because I love you hiding your mug there. Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky. Like you, we sort of live in a lovely part of the world. We live in Oxfordshire. The Ballymore mug, it is, in Oxfordshire, and so sort of self-contained and absolutely nothing to complain about. But what's been quite nice has been my children are very into riding and show jumping and stuff, and there've been so many fundraising things that people have been doing. They did Equestrian Relief first off with sort of Frankie Dettori and Aki McCoy and Zara Phillips and people like that. And they raised about 300,000. So, it's just a good example. And there's been a lot of sort of good public spirited this. So for those of us who are actually in no bad shape at all, have nothing to complain about, they're just sort of rallying around and doing something for people who have had a rough time. And you and I know one who has in particular.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. Our friend Tim Rook-Taylor, who was a Lawrence Tavener, who we lost a few weeks ago. We spent January on tour with him.
Yeah. I mean, just a lovely time we had, doing I'm Sorry, I Haven't a Clue. And it was lovely because it's the first time you and I had sort of worked together. And Tim, bizarrely, I'd met Tim in 1974 as a kid. I went to the bookshop in Edinburgh, bought the goodies file and met the goodies and took a little photograph. Had no idea that 40 years ago, this sort of starstruck boy, that 40 years ago we'd be working together. And as you know, he was the most delightful, lovely man. He loved his sport, loved football, loved cricket.
Yeah, big Derby County fan. Most conversations found their way into Derby County sphere.
Somebody told me that he would go to the stands at Derby County. He'd be there. Then at half time, he'd go off to sort of the posh bit and get some. But he'd then bring food back to the stands and they'd sort of have a picnic from whatever there was in the sort of the posh bit of the ground. But that was Tim.
Known Clough? Would he have been around at Derby County when Clough was there?
I suppose he must have known him. It would have been that era anyway. But he was just such a happy man, wasn't he? He was almost so content and loved doing what he was doing on the shows, and the warmth. I mean, I'm not used to playing sort of 2,000 seat theatres, but that's what we did in the tour, and the warmth and the affection and the sort of cheering when Tim was announced, and he was just, he could turn his hand to everything. He's a great team player, wasn't he? Because you look at all the things he was involved with, all those radio shows in the 1970s, and these sort of every other page of John Cleese's book, he sort of appears. And you and I were there when we started talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Do you remember that?
And he suddenly went, "Oh yeah, I worked with Sharon Tate."
Yes. Oh, you worked with Sharon Tate? Yeah. We did a little thing about
me, Sharon, and Orson Welles.
Orson Welles. and it was just he didn't sort of build that story up. It was just incidental to his life, and he was just a lovely, lovely man. And yes, we got the call. I'm sure you got the same thing. Got a text from the producer on Easter Sunday saying terrible news that Tim has died, and it was the dreaded coronavirus. So it's just this extraordinary thing in this amazing, wonderful weather and these blue skies, that out there this thing is swirling around unseen, and and doing its stuff. It's a horrible thought.
Yeah, I mean, it was just undoubtedly a very, very good man, wasn't he? And we were lucky, I suppose, that we got to
We were so lucky. And
It's fun
also,
too.
Christine, his wife, they drove around the country together. And occasionally I would sort of open the curtain window and out in the car park, Tim and Christine would be getting into the car to drive off to the next venue. And it was a lovely sort of happy time that you know, you'd see them having breakfast together. And there we were doing these shows in the evening. And during the day, you know, he and Christine would be off, I don't know, looking at sort of antique shops or just driving around the country. It's rather lovely because you and I mean, you're probably used to driving yourself around the country or taking trains here and there. And this was a sort of little mini break they were on. It just happened to involve a show with a 2,000 audience that evening.
I did. I travelled with him once. He gave me a lift. I'd done one of those tours before. He gave me a lift from, it's quite long. It's like Canterbury to Norwich or something. And he just, and he just told me, you know, just amazing. You know, I was asking him to, but just sort of told me lots of stories. We certainly forgot to pay the Dartford toll charge.
That's a story now.
But yeah, no, great man. And it's interesting as well when you're talking there about us spending time in the dressing room there. I think there is a thing whereby, you know, you think about theatre, you think about sport or whatever. There's a lot of time as a sort of viewer, you're thinking about what's going out on the pitch, what's going on the stage. But it's such a sort of crucial part of everything, isn't it? I was listening to this surprising, enjoyable podcast it was Rob Key talking to Goff and Harmison.
Yes.
And they were just talking about really what it came down to now. The numbers ceased to matter. And what they loved was the people they played the game with.
Yes, yes,
and
indeed.
That side of it, you know, and listening to them, they were sort of romanticising a bit about, and I suppose sort of slightly emotional about it, but it's such an important part of that whole thing, isn't it? That when you bond with someone, yeah, there may be moments like on the pitch or on the, you know, set or whatever together, but really that's not where these things are built, are they?
No,
you know, like
I mean,
us in January, we'd be sitting around sort of scribbling ideas for jokes down in the dressing room or trying to, you know, eat something before we go on, and that's the bits where you get to know each other. There's this thing in the day that's the 2-hour show, but actually it's sort of messing about and being rude to each other in the taxi on the way there, and then going, you know, having drinks and stuff afterwards. That's in a way that's where the real stuff happens.
It is in the dressing room stuff, the dressing room mentality. I mean, you and I both know Graham Cowdery, and of course Colin Cowdery was known as Kipper because he would just spend his time in the dressing room fast asleep, and then they would sort of nudge him awake, and out he'd go and bat and score a century. And Graham, the stories about the Kent dressing room, where, you know, the last game of the season, it would always be a thing to sort of try and tip the sandwiches into the coffin, you know, with all the kit that somebody would have, and they'd close up the coffin in what would be the first week in September and open it again in April to find that the sandwich had been put there 6 months previously, and just fantastic stuff. And putting.
Someone told me a good thing about, I think it was he knew someone that had played for, I think, Nottinghamshire, but I hope I'm not getting anyone in trouble here, when they used to have a sort of, you know, I suppose in the days when there were so many counties and it wasn't a two-division system, and I don't know, perhaps half of all games could have literally no competition. And there'd be a thing like at Slip, there was a competition to see who could keep their eyes shut the longest.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
The moment the bowlers started their running, at Slip you would close your eyes, and that was the thing. A bit like you sort of standing on, you know, just daring each other on. It was just how late you could open your eyes.
But I think, I mean, it also is the characters. And I was talking to somebody about this earlier on, and you know, they said, was there rivalry amongst comedians? And I mean, I think I didn't really like that about Mock the Week because it was a sort of intense competitiveness about that. But then as you get older, you realise, you know, we're all in the same business, and the anecdotes come out and sort of stories. And I mean, the cricket is the same thing. I mean, Derek Randall was obviously such a sort of jack-in-the-box great character. My favourite story of him, I think somebody turned up for tea at Derek Randall's house, and he answered the door and he was wearing his pads. And they said, well, so what are you wearing your pads for? He said, just breaking them in. It's the best way to break them in is wear them around the house. So he joined a cup of tea. So he went into his cup of tea, and a few minutes later, his wife came into the room with a tea tray, also wearing pads. So this is just kind of an everyday in the Randall household. But yeah, so you do sort of pick up those stories and those characters and sort of backstage. And you're quite right. That's where a lot of the fun happens. I mean, when I think about taverners, you know, those are on sort of like taverners tours. I used to do quite a lot in the sort of 80s. Leslie Crowther, was the president, I suppose, of the Taverners in those days, and he was great. He used to host these auctions, and he'd get people up on stage, and he was always quite rude to the people. Somebody would get up and they'd have a slightly unfortunate haircut, and he'd say, "Blimey, who cut your hair? The council." It's a great. And
what did you do then as a player? What did you what did you have to offer?
Well, Miles, actually, I was okay. Well, let's go back a bit. So I'll come take this off a long run. So I was at Wellington, and the two great cricketers
at the battle.
Yeah, the battle. I was there a long time, and with the Duke of Wellington, we knew each other very, very well, and we played a lot of golf when that was happening because great golf courses around Portugal when he was there doing that campaign. Yes, so Wellington, the school, which I was surprised to see, the Crown, which you were in fact, Wellington doubled as Kensington Palace, because I always wondered why Princess Margaret was going back with Lord Snowdon to Wellington, and then I realised, it's supposed to be Kensington Palace. But yeah, so I was at Wellington, and the two star cricketers was Rob Dyer, who went on to play for Warwickshire, and Hugh Wilson, who went on to play for Surrey, and a couple of sort of cricket memories there. Colin, talking of Cowdrey, I remember the Australian boys, the Australian youth team came to Wellington. And it was about 1977, I think it was then. And so we watched all these Australian youth players. And years later, I found the scorecard. And I was wondering how many of these Australian youth players had gone on to become cricketers. And the only one that I really recognised was David Boone, who went on to, was a very, very well-known opening batsman, but more famous, I think.
I met him recently out in outside a hotel in London. He was standing there having a cigarette.
Could you see could you actually see the hotel behind him, or was he now wide enough to hide it? Because he did.
There was a man with a skyscraper behind him.
Because he was enormous, not least because I think he used to love to break records for drinking the most amount of beer on the flight from Australia to England, or the other way around.
There'll have been those little cans.
Oh well, quite possibly.
I said I was slightly surprised to see him. I just said so. I didn't sort of think, that's David Boone. I should think of what to say. I went, "Oh, you Booney."
That's very presumptuous.
And then about 2 minutes later, we happened to get into the lift at the same time, and it was totally silent and sort of awkward,
and crowded. But actually, so Colin.
Helping, yeah.
So Colin Cowdrey was playing in that team for some reason. He played against the Australian youth team. And obviously, look, these are sort of 17, 18-year-old Australians who are going to go on to play Sheffield Shield cricket. So they were very, very good. And so our players sort of struggled a little bit. And then a wicket went down, out walked Colin to play for our side. And he just seemed to have all the time in the world to play.
What age would he have been then?
Oh, he'd have been about 40, sort of late 40s.
He played Test cricket into his mid-40s.
He played at 45, and he came to, yes, I think that evening he spoke after dinner, and he was always so self-deprecating, and he'd say, and I remember, let me tell you the story, he said, Australia playing England, and it was down under, and I got a call because they'd had a couple of injuries, and I got a call from the captain, Mike Donness. He said, hello, we're a couple short on Saturday. Do you fancy a game? And he made it sound like it was a finish. We're a couple short. And so off he went down under, of course, to play to face Dennis Lillee and Jeff Thompson at their quickest. And I think the famous story, he went out to bat Colin, and he thought, well, between overs, he'd introduced himself to Jeff Thompson. So he said, hello, we haven't met, Colin Cowdrey. And I don't think I can repeat what Jeff Thompson said, but you can imagine I think the F word did feature. I think the first word was fat, and the second word began with C. Anyway, so Wellington. That's where I started my cricket, and I was I was a leg spin bowler. That's what I'd started at Clifton Hall, my prep school in Edinburgh. I just fancied the art of leg spin. So I would bowl and bat about number 7 or so, and I only ever made sort of, I think, third 11, or maybe possibly, if I was lucky, second 11. So it wasn't particularly
Where's
good.
their ground in Edinburgh? Is that the Clifton Club, isn't there, in Edinburgh?
Oh, well, Clifton Hall. This was just outside. It was on the motorway to Glasgow. The ground wasn't on the motorway. It wasn't, as you can imagine. That would have been a very.
It does sound an unideal playing situation.
I remember. If you faced Malcolm Marshall on the M25, I tell you, you knew it. You're going to be in trouble that day.
The M8 is an absolute road.
Can you? But cricketers. Colin used to talk about, was it about a man who went on to become the Bishop of Oxford, who said he could never walk down a nave of a cathedral in England without wondering if it would take spin.
Oh yeah, well that was probably
David Shepherd. David Shepherd.
Yes. Parsons Pitch. That's if you're looking at book recommendations.
Oh, well done, fantastic. So that's where my love of cricket, and but then I sort of started.
Who were your heroes then when you got into it? So for instance, 91, I started like cricket, which just in time for say Botham's last test. So it was sort of Boot Shearer, early Atherton. Power out the side, then Lamb. Those would have been those sort of figures for me. But who would have been your first heroes in the game?
At the first time, this would be in the 70s. It would be the side that actually beat the Australians, I think, down under at 71. It would be Ray Illingworth and Alan Knott and Derek Underwood and Tony Gregg and people like that. And then when the West Indies...
When Illingworth was a player, so I only knew him in his sort of mid-90s Supremo phase in a kind of Motson-style jacket, looking grumpy on the balcony.
Grumpy would be it.
Known of him as a player.
Well, he was. I think he's one of those ones who was a good captain and a good off-spin bowler and respectable all-rounder. But much better than that in his own mind as well. Because I think somebody said, I think it was Sylvester Clarke or something. They had an amazing. Oh no, it's not. It's one of anyone. I can't remember who it was, but who had a fantastic day for Surrey, that they'd scored. It wasn't Sylvester Clarke, but scored 100 that day and took 6 wickets and took 4 catches. And somebody said to Ray Illingworth as they left the pitch, they said, "Have you ever known anybody dominate a day's play quite so much?" And Ray Illingworth thought for a second. He said, "Well, hang on." He said, "There was a game against Nottinghamshire when I think I took about 5 wickets." He said, "I was unplayable that day." And somehow he'd sort of got that round to him. So it's back to characters again, and great sort of cricket characters. So
Gower would have played under Illingworth at Leicestershire. And that strikes me as an incredible sort of clash of personalities.
Well, absolutely, slightly chalk and cheese.
That's
because
really.
So, the 70s would sort of seem to be sort of almost in black and white, those characters, the Illingworth thing, and then it came into colour. David
Steele, he'd have been there.
Well, yes, actually, that was about the late mid 70s when the West Indies were just beating us all ends up, and we had players like I think Frank Hayes and Brian Luckhurst and people like that, and then they needed somebody who was good at facing fast bowling, and they picked David Steele, and this unlikely man who came out looking like a bank clerk with the glasses and stuff like that, and I think he got a couple of hundreds that season.
He was our cricket coach at school, not mine because I wasn't good enough, but he was the first team coach at my school, David Steele, and I did once face him in the nets. He'd have been well into his 60s by then.
Wow!
And he bowled left arm, didn't he? Slow left arm.
Did he?
I mean, I'm not good, but to me it seemed absolutely unplayable. But oddly, I actually already I'd got his autograph when I was younger than that. At my school, the Taverners had played a game before I knew anything about anything. The Taverners came and played. So when I was about 12 or 13, possibly, I went on our school ground. They came and played a game against the sort of, would have been I went to prep school in Windsor. So it's in the grounds of Windsor Castle, made famous by the Crown. And I got people like Bill Tidy. Somewhere I've got an autograph book with Farouk Engineering. I saw John Snow bowl.
Oh.
To me, it was absolutely incredible.
Oh.
I remember listening to some real old, because it was our school pavilion, I could sort of get in the way and stand probably closer than I was meant to. And I remember sitting behind some proper old timers who were talking about that summer's Aussie side, which would have been the 93. And they were saying, I mean, that guy, that Steve Waugh bats too high. I can't believe they're waiting. And these people, that was the consensus as well. Steve Waugh was really,
Very
really
overrated.
didn't deserve a place in the Australian top six. So
Bill
maybe no one knows anything.
Bill Tidy, you remind me of Bill Tidy, who, again, a lovely taverner. And playing games for the Taverners and also for the Bunburys. That was sort of another sort of kettle of fish. But with the Taverners, you'd rub shoulders with some of the great cricketers. And I remember a game at Wormsley, which was Getty's ground, Paul Getty's ground, which had been a sort of field full of cattle about £2 million ago, and had been transformed into this temporary pavilions. And Brian Johnson was he was a commentator. I think the wind, what do they call it, windcock, weathercock, was in the shape of Brian Johnson's head, as a sort of little tribute to him. But there was a Lord's Taverners against an Australian 11. And the Australian 11 happened to be, obviously sort of international cricketers, as was the Lord's team. And Mike Denness is playing for the Taverners, who sadly died pretty young, actually, about 10, 15 years ago, Mike Denness. And for some reason, they put me in at number 4, I think. Anyway, a wicket fall. I hadn't really been paying attention, and a wicket fell. And I said, oh, right. And they said, oh, you're on to bat. I said, oh, God, who's the bowler? They said, Dennis Lilly. So I walked over the boundary rope, that's it. And as I walked to the middle, all I heard was Bill Tidy's voice saying, "Don't worry, Rory. The worst thing that can happen is you'll be totally humiliated." And that was an experience, because he's obviously being very, very slow, Dennis Lilly, but still the ball was sort of bent like a banana. It's that swinging, really swung in the air. And all I could do, I just sort of tried to play a very straight bat and very correct. And obviously after 3 deliveries, Dennis Lilly got very bored with this, and so he bowled a short one. And I thought, well, I've got to try and hook this. I've got to try and hook this. And I hooked it and made contact. And I looked up, and because I think I must have shut my eyes, saw the umpire signalling 4. And so I looked over to square leg to see where it had gone. And Dennis Lee said, "Other way, mate." And it had come flying off an edge and gone down to third man.
I scored a 4, 1 bounce 4 there off Caddick. What year it was. Must have been a sort of royal household team, if that sounds right. He opened the bowling for them, and I'd started at the non-strikers. It was me and Strauss were the openers. I'm bad. I'm really bad. And
so hang on, was this Johann Sebastian? No, not.
Yeah.
Which Strauss was this?
It was the Bach. And it was only a year after he'd retired, but I still had to plead for him to face the first ball, because he said, "I haven't really played for a bit." I thought, all right. When you played, anyway, he took the first ball, tapped it off for a single, and so I think I faced 2 overs of Andy Caddick, who comes in long run up still. And it was I couldn't, if I was good, I'd have been out. Do you know what I mean? I'd have followed one and got an edge, but I couldn't get anywhere near it, and I was just playing a missing, and he was getting across, and I did eventually. I was so unsure what to do. I just charged at him and swung it, and it was absolutely ballooned up over third man and a 1 bounce 4.
I love it. Not being able to.
Yeah, I said, "Was that all right?" And he went, "Yeah, I think you've earned the right to play a few shots now." We played and missed 4 or 5. Yeah.
We're playing and missing. Back to Geoffrey Boycott was playing, and I think it was Angus Fraser who was bowling to him, and Boycott sort of played and missed about 4 or 5, and Angus Fraser was very frustrated, so he came down the wicket and said, "Who's the best fast bowler you've ever faced?" And Boycott looked up and said, because he'd missed every ball so far in the over, and Boycott just said to him, "I'd fetch thee into muck and nettles if thou'd give me one to reach." I mean, obviously we go on all day with cricket stories, but one of my favourites is the umpire. Arthur Jepson and John Fortune always used to love Arthur Jepson stories, and he was a wonderful umpire. And it was getting very late in one of those John Player games with a very late finish. But I think it was about 7 o'clock, and the batsman goes out to the middle, and he takes guard, and he says to the umpire, Arthur Jepson, he says, "Hey, umpire, it's a bit dark out here." And Arthur Jepson said, "Look up in the sky." He says, "Look, what's that up in the sky there?" And the batsman said, "Well, that's the moon, Arthur." He said, "Ah," he said, "how much bloody further do you want to see? Now go back and bat." So, but that's where we first came in. Was the cricket has always been a game of characters, and comedy. Obviously, we've met these great characters, and when we've been doing charity games and whatever, then you just hear like Tim's stories. And cricket just seems to be a sport that, I mean, I don't know if the sports that are faster, if if the tennis players have a great, I don't sense that tennis players have a tremendous sort of. I don't know, kind of. Would you sort of expect there to be a lot of amazing anecdotes back in the dressing rooms at Wimbledon?
Well, the weird thing there is you change in the same room as your opponent, don't you? So
Yes.
there's probably a sort of gloomy, sort of silent thing. There must be people that get on, but also what the recovery or whatever they've got to do. They're playing games in such rapid succession.
Yeah.
We might talk about, oh, well, you've got to run 3 and then be ready to face the first ball the next over or whatever. That's not the same as playing 5 sets and then having a banana and a glass of water and then going into the doubles match.
Talking of dressing rooms, actually, I once did, and it was backstage at Murrayfield, and it's wonderful because they've got the home dressing room, which is a Scottish dressing room, which is, and it's wonderful. It's just because each thing is obviously got the number and where your shirt hangs, and above that the names of the famous players. So if you're number 15 and you've got Andy Irvine and Gavin Hastings, of course, is one of the great number 15s, and so his name is sitting. And as you sit there, if you're now the current fullback Stuart Hogg, and you're sitting where Gavin Hastings or Andy Irvine sat, and it's great. It's a history, and it's known as home. Now the away dressing room at Murrayfield is always known as the England dressing room. and the thing about the England dressing room, or the away dressing room, is there's a socking great pillar right in the middle of the dressing room. So if you're a coach and you want to address the whole team, you can't, because you'll be talking with the backs will be able to hear you, but the forwards can't. And so it's wonderful that it was designed that way. So another little.
It's the same. I went on the Stamford Bridge tour with my eldest son, and you go into the home dressing rooms, and it's sort of a range. It's like it's sort of like a penthouse apartment. There's sort of massage areas and amazing sort of shower stuff. It couldn't be more spacious and opulent. And then you go to the away dressing room. It's like something from Big Yellow Storage Company or whatever.
I think it may have been in that dressing room that Will Carling was warming up the England players, and he was trying to get them. The last thing he said to them, he said, we're going to take them apart. We're going to take. Will Carling never spoke like that. He said, we're going to take them apart. We're going to take them apart. He said, it's going to be like men against boys. And just then the referee tapped on the door and said, "Come on, boys." So how lucky are we, though, to be able to sort of enjoy sport and to be able to, as you know, to be on the same pitch and in the same county as Caddick or.
For me, there's a kind of bittersweet thing about it. You sort of think I don't deserve. There's an element when you think I don't really deserve to be here.
Yes.
And there's a nerves thing. People, proper players. I remember playing a game up at Warwick, and they were just couldn't believe the sort of catches that people were pulling off. Right.
Oh yeah.
And so like someone like Tim Munton was sort of tying his shoelace at third man and then just set off and took a running, diving, one-handed catch and sort of tossed it back to the bowl and laughed. Whereas I'm there thinking, please don't come towards me at any point. About it. And he said, well, when you're a player, you take tens of thousands of catches in practice. And yeah, you don't think about it. It's totally sort of instinctive. Whereas I would get into these situations and you could think, the best way to do it is think, what would my teenage self think about it now? And then you can just live off the excitement. Whereas you can think, what is my 40-year-old self doing in this situation? I played a game for TMS, the 60th anniversary thing. We were up in Leeds. And I was fielding at mid-off when Michael Vaughan was batting. And I just thought, this is unsafe. I'm literally not equipped,
Oh.
I can't do anything. And I did get put in, I think in the indoor school, it was raining or there was some, occasionally they're a bit officious at Lords and there was some sort of, we couldn't use a pitch that had been booked or whatever. And we played in the indoor school. And Devon Malcolm was bowling.
Mm-hmm. The destroyer.
Paul Pritchard was batting. And I was asked to field at silly points. And I couldn't bear it. I mean, I just couldn't bear it. And I just thought, I wonder what I can do. And I remember Paul Pritchard, as Devon Malcolm was running into bowl, looked at me. He's got, the proper players, they just have so much time. He actually looked at me and said, I can see you walking away. Really, I thought, I'm not going to stay here. I think by about ball 4 of the over, I was against the netting. There was absolutely inconceivable to me that I would feel that close to people doing what, you know.
Oh, absolutely. I remember Mike Gatting, the first sort of it was a charity game again, and he came out to bat. And it was just after he went out on the tour to South Africa. It was just before apartheid had finished, and it was the Rebel Tour, and he just had a testimonial season at Middlesex and had been very successful, sort of like a couple of 100,000 or something, and then immediately went on the Rebel Tour of South Africa. And being the sort of slightly chippy lefty that I am and was then, I said, I kind of thought that was, you know, we did some sketches about it. That's right. And Willie Rushton, who was another taverner, and he wrote. We were writing a thing about "Oh, what a lovely tour" along "Oh, what a lovely war," and he wrote this thing about, and it was Willie Rushton who wrote this thing about Mike Gatting. And what was it? It was. Why do people think I'm balmy? Make me wish I'd not been born. I studied apartheid, was captain of the side. I made them watch the video of Zulu Dawn. And it went on and on. The final thing was, I'd rather play for England. I'd rather play for England in Johannesburg for 20 times the pay. So it was a satirical sketch about that. Anyway, and about a few weeks after that, having sort of a satirical critical sketch about Mike Gatting, I find myself, he comes out to bat, and I find myself fielding at Gully. And you know, Mike Gatting had one of the best square cuts in the game. Was sort of very violent, and as Henry Blofeld once said about, he just one square. He said, "Well, I mean, a tremendous cut by Mike Gatting. I mean, you know, he dismissed it from his presence." And I just said to the bowler, "Please don't bowl one short." And Gat just said, "I can cut off the front foot as well, you know." And I just thought, if anything is in the zone, I'm going to be wearing it. It's going to be on the end of my nose. But just great. Brian Close was another great character. Brian Close, another one who never had a bad day's cricket. You know, he was. I think there was one where, because he used to stand so close at Silly Point, like where you were, quite often the ball would actually hit him and go straight up in the air, and he'd just shout, "Catch it, catch it, catch it," as this thing sort of ricocheted off his scalp. Because he was the one who, remember when the West Indies again were at their pomp with probably Marshall Holding, people like that, and he and John Edrich had to bat out to sort of the last session, and they came back to the dressing room covered in bruises. And just eventually just burst out laughing and said, "How many bloody runs did we score today for all these bruises?" Yeah. And I think there was one thing where he was feeling very close to it, straight up in the air. He fell over, and actually, as he fell over, it landed in literally between his legs at the top, with his face downward. And his favourite story had always been about Tony Locke, who was a brilliant catcher, and he said the great catchphrase was Lockie to caught that in cheeks of his arse. And there was Brian Close lying face down, having literally caught somebody in cheeks of his arse. So anyway, there we go.
Have you been around the world to watch?
Yeah, I was wondering if you might ask about, you know, the best day's play I've seen, but I always seem to get there the day.
Question, Rory.
No, but the day after or the day before.
A question here from Jeremy in Islington. What is the best day's play that you've ever seen?
Well, I always seem to get there the day after or the day before the brilliant days happen. But the memories that I did have were abroad, funnily enough. And actually, there was bad, maybe Cape Town. I remember Cape Town, and that was when, because a lot of my cricket watching coincided with.
You criticise Gatting for going to South Africa?
This was now. You were now allowed to go to South Africa, and this was it would have been late 90s actually, and it was really disappointing because England were just beginning to get on top, and then their wicketkeeper would have been Richardson probably, and their bowler who used to was it Paul, who was the guy who had a really weird bowling action? They said it was like a frog in a blender.
Paul Adams.
Paul Adams.
Well,
And then
they scored a big sort of last wicket partnership, didn't
they
they?
did, absolutely. So they took us out of the game, and then Graham Thorpe was batting quite well, and then Mike Watkinson came out and managed to run him out, and so England lost the game. And I just remember a sense of just standing at that beautiful ground, Newlands, and just feeling thoroughly depressed that once again it was when in Mike Atherton days, once again, sort of England had lost, and it was just really quite depressing because you and I mean, the 80s were fun with Gower and Lamb and Gatting, yes, Gatting as well, but with Gower and Lamb and both of them. And then something happened, and it was, well, something happened. Then Graham Gooch happened, and everything got a lot more serious, with Mickey Stewart and Alex Stewart. Mickey Stewart was coaching, and it was about seriousness. And Gooch was a very, very serious man. He did have a sense of humour because he used to sort of imitate Bob Willis's run-up and stuff. But nevertheless, it seemed like characters like Gower and Botham and Lamb were sort of too frivolous, so you didn't take it seriously enough. And if Gower had been...
Maverick seems to be a sort of negatively used word now, doesn't it? Maverick seems to... I thought at the end of the 90s, what got good at it, someone like Hussain,
yes,
he was good at saying, I don't care if these people don't get on. I don't care if they're odds. They're really good, and I want them in my team. And that kind of thing about...
Exactly that, but it meant that the 80s, having been the flamboyant era, the 90s were, you'd have the Alex Stewarts and the Derek Pringles and stuff like that. Who, they were professional and hard working cricketers. But the 90s was, we didn't win a lot of series in the 1990s.
Results. That was what was so good about 05. That was
absolutely. But the 90s, so we didn't win many series.
Do you remember losing to New Zealand in '99? And that was when Hussain was booed on the balcony.
Oh dear!
Post-match presentation, and that was in a way, that was what was required. In the same way that still sometimes we lose the first match in a series that we go on to win. That was the sort of rocket that was required, and that was the starting.
Would they call him Nadir Hussain for that? Possibly. I was trying to work. Was it that's? I might get my Nadirs and Zeniths mixed up, but that would be a Nadir, wouldn't it? A low point. And then
South Africa the year before, but that I remember being particularly low point. But all like the 46 all out and all those sorts of things.
Oh,
I used to genuinely panic about that as a sort of schoolboy. I used to watch England, and then things would go wrong. Obviously, my hero is Michael Atherton, and he would do, there was this kind of one out, all out thing, I suppose. But I remember I used to genuinely worry, that thing where people keep doing badly, what if everyone does badly at the same time?
Yes.
And that is what happened. And I really, for me, the 46 all out was the moment that I'd been worrying about happened.
Was Michael, so you said, but Michael Aston was a great hero of yours?
Yeah, continues to be. Yeah.
I love that. Andy Zaltzman, another great comedian, a great friend of ours, who always says that he says, "I'm from the Northern Hemisphere, the wonderful hemisphere, the Northern Hemisphere. Any hemisphere that can produce both Michelangelo and Michael Atherton is the one for me." And then, as you said, but then we got to 2005 and that incredible series, and that was it was a joy to be alive, wasn't it, during that? And just so gripping in a way that we didn't see then subsequently until last year, of course, with the World Cup final and the Headingley Test.
Well, I rewatched that recently and re-listened to it, but I was at 05 the last 2 days at the Oval, and when I was at the World Cup final last year, which was an amazing thing. It wasn't, in a way, it wasn't fun. It was just anxious. Day. But even though the World Cup was an amazing game, it didn't feel as great as the 12th of September 2005. When
that was
watching Ashley Giles batting out for a draw.
Me, it was extraordinary. Well, I was I was supposed to be writing a TV show at the time. We were doing Bremner, Bird and Fortune, and I know literally on the left-hand side I was writing a sketch in a book. On the left-hand side, I was trying to write a script, and on the right-hand side, at the end of each over, I was writing the score, which is just quite extraordinary. Somewhere I've got this book with things about Tony Blair and Gordon Brown or something, and this sort of 16 for 1, 23 for 2, and just because it was obviously so clearly so gripped. And I mean, had you ever seen a Test match up until that point that's as gripping as the Edgbaston one, which went right down to, that was one run in it, and that wonderful piece of commentary from Richie Benno was Jones, Bowden, out.
Yeah.
Something was just wonderful.
It's just because I was listening. The thing I was listening to the other day, it had I'd never would have heard the Sky commentary from that, and it's Bob Willis commentating on it, and it's that he's one of those people that has had I suppose like Tim had a real outpouring, I think, and a lot of people saying Bob Willis on the debate or whatever. That wasn't Bob Willis. That's Bob Willis' character. It's a bit sort of like Lorraine Kelly, like an on version. But
I was in Rome the day after he died, and I just doing a show there. And as the car, I took a car to the airport and passed a restaurant called Goose, and I thought, a restaurant in Rome called Goose, and it was and Goose was Bob Willis's nickname.
Was it a Bob Willis themed Italian restaurant?
That'd be very funny. Go back to your mark.
It was lovely hearing him, I must say. He came to a play I was in last. I'm not good at dates anymore, Rory, because there's no nothing.
There's nothing to judge them by now.
I couldn't tell you what day it is today. And it doesn't matter, does it? But he came, he came, and he was just, me and the writer went and chatted to him afterwards. And one of the things we said was how exciting it was to meet him. And he just looked completely baffled by this. As if he'd sort of misheard us. He was going, what? It's exciting to meet you.
Oh. That's very...
He didn't see the idea that he was, someone with a kind of this incredible land. Just didn't occur to him that people would be, he was, yeah.
But it's got us to meet people, and it's got us to places. And I want to ask you about you getting to places particularly, but talk about sort of meeting people. Very early on, I started off in sort of 1984, just sort of the year I left university. In fact, I had the advantage of being in London, so I could be on the cabaret circuit and doing sort of lectures and finishing my finals and stuff in the same year.
That was in your burlesque days.
In the cabaret, doing late night shows at the Donmar Warehouse with Bertice Redding and people like that, and great fun. And you throw me now. What was the story? Oh yes, and then so by 1985, I'd done a Wogan show, and that's when we did this thing, 19 Not Out, which was the sort of Paul Hardcastle record about the average age of the combat soldier in Vietnam being 19.
Paul Hardcastle, the Wizard. Is that him? Is he the person who did that song?
Oh, was it?
Top of the Pops theme.
Yes.
And that is Paul Hardcastle himself, I think.
Was that him as well? I had no idea. All I knew was that 19.
About wrong, please write a letter to the charity. Not me.
Yes, please address it to Traveller's Care of. And it was so. It popped into my mind. So I don't know why. Just let's make it as a parody about cricket, and the average score of the English batsman was 19. And it turned out that Gower's average was 19, as it happened, in that disastrous West Indies rubber, as Henry Blowfield would say. But then, anyway, the point is, then I found myself that summer, that extraordinary summer when the record had been in the charts. Brian Johnson said, "Well, no, come on, Bremers, look, you should join the Taverners." And come that. So he got me into the Taverners. Number 1666 was strange. He said, "Come on, Bremers, great character."
You have a sort of number.
Yeah, yes, a membership. You've got a member. You must have Lord's Taverners membership number.
I do. I didn't know it came with a number.
Oh, well, there you go.
Probably about 8 million by now.
Well, yes. I'll look it up in the book. It's over there somewhere, the other side of the library. Library office. Anyway, where were we? Brian Johnson. Yes. So and he said, "Come on, Bremers," and he used to do his after dinner stuff. And I remember he was in a tent once, and he was doing his after dinner thing, and it was the West Indies were playing, so it was an eve of Test dinner, or it might have been the Friday, in which case it would have been the end of Test match dinner, because they would go through it in about 2 days. But anyway, he was there. He was in a tent talking, and then the rain started, and the rain started to beat down on the roof of the tent. And without really sort of breaking rhythm, Brian Johnson looked up and said, "Is that rain or the West Indies pissing on us already?" Which is one of. And so he got me. He said, "Come on, brothers, come and do a view from the boundary." So we had a chat, which TMS re-ran, actually, funnily enough, this summer in lockdown. They were that desperate. So he said, "No, you do a very good Richie Benaud." So I started to do a little bit of Richie Benaud and say what a great commentator he was. And I was tapped on the shoulder, and I turned around, and there was Richie Benaud. He said, "Never mind all that. What about the royalties? That's what I want to know." And it was a classic Brian Johnson setup, and I loved Benno's commentaries, and that's, I think, impressionists do start out as fans, and I learned, I was listening to Jim Laker and Bill McLaren doing the rugby, and Benno doing the cricket, and so I just wanted to imitate him, and he had some wonderful. So he came up with some great lines like, "So Glenn McGrath out for one, just 99 runs short of what would have been a remarkable century," and just terrific. And somebody asked about captaincy. He said, "Captaincy, it's 80% luck and 20% skill, but don't try it without the 20%." He said. But now, so I was lucky to meet him and the other commentators and stuff like that. Now, but you managed to join the great band of. Can you tell that story? How did that come about? You decided that you were going to lie your way into the commentary box.
Well, I did. I never got into the commentary box. Well, I got into the press box. Yeah, 2006. Well, I just watching in 2005. I just remember being very envious of people in the press box. I thought that's the best job. That's the best job there is. Surely you just watch cricket all day. So I went to. I think there was a Pakistan tour first. That would have been sort of late 2005. Then the next tour was India in 2006. So I just was just dishonest. That's what it comes down to. And I got someone at BBC Sport provided me with some headed notepaper that said Miles Jupp is our cricket correspondent, and I used that really. So I rang someone up at the ECB and they sort of sent me the accreditation forms, and then when I got out there, I remember there'd be sort of awkward things where you'd ring to book the travel. I found out who booked the travel, and I'd ring to book it, and they said, "Should we send the bill for this to BBC Scotland?" And I was getting that all gets a little bit sort of Frank Abagnale Jr.
Yes, indeed.
So I got there, but actually there'd been, in the meantime, before I got out there was a rights. The BBC had fallen out with your friend and mine, the BCCI, and they'd actually pulped all the BBC's applications. So the pass that I was expecting wasn't actually there. But by the time I found that out, I was already standing on the outfield at Nagpur. So I thought, if I can get this far, I can do it. So it seems like a long time ago. It was 14 years ago.
So you went out. So you'd obviously paid your own way out and just went into the commentary box, the press box. I'd
splurged my panto fee on a on a ticket to India. So I was there for a month, and people I met lots of. That's the thing, is about being surrounded by heroes and whatever. But I didn't really. Although it was a sort of laugh afterwards, at the time I was wildly out of my depth.
Did you actually write for anybody? Did you write anything?
Nothing. I wrote a blog for the Western Mail newspaper that was read by 22 people. This was in the nascent days of blogs. It was pioneering. And I did then do the show about it and the book about it, and that was all great. But at the time, I genuinely hadn't taken in, just in a way, how much of that sort of work is acting. They are, you can make Aggers or whatever might make it sound like they're having a terrific day or whatever, but they're having some sort of nightmare scenario, whatever. And there is an element of that, and I kind of hadn't realised how hard work it was. And and I was lying to people. I turned up at their, I turned up at their work pretending to do what they did, and that's there are consequences to that sort of behaviour that I hadn't really.
But they're often, we love our cricket, but in a way, I mean, I imagine they must love their cricket too. But often, by the way that they write, you think that they just, they're very sort of curmudgeonly about it, and they sort of, and you think, were they sort of people that you would sort of think they're really fun to be with, or were actually you think, God, there you are, you're going to Pakistan, you're going to India, you're going to the West Indies, you travel all around the world. Why aren't you dancing for joy every day of your life? And they just don't seem to be.
No, but I suppose anything you can become sort of if not blasé about it, then you can't. There's that sort of excitement just sort of has to go down, I suppose. But the other thing is that thing about having to keep a lid, having to be, your job is to be neutral when you're not. You're probably, the reason you're where you are is because you love a thing so much, and because you know, and it's like you walk into the press box and you have to just you have to stop being a fan and you have to start being a neutral from that point. And that's probably a source of frustration, but also the extent to which they engage with the game. I genuinely thought I could, you know, I know a lot about this, so when I'm around them, they'll think that I know, you know, the sort of same amount that they will, or I'll seem to. And the knowledge that was, and the recall, you know, you go and have dinner with these people, and you think, well, I might as well be sitting in the middle of a supercomputer here. I actually can't. So I was wildly out of my depth. But some people were very nice to me, I must say. And if people weren't, I honestly don't blame them.
But funnily enough, I mean, about encyclopedic, I know at least two comedians who are completely encyclopedic about cricket. Andy Zaltzman.
Well, Zaltzman and Paul Sinner, I suppose.
Oh, but it's extraordinary because you can say, if you're just like I was beforehand about trying to remember the name of the Essex cricketer who had done so brilliantly, they would say, oh, yeah, so-and-so. Or they'd have a remember of each day or each score. Oh, yes, that was when they scored 46 in that innings. And and the opponent, they got 138 for... and I thought, how do you remember this stuff? And Andy...
There's in your life, though, isn't there, where your brain is sort of like a sponge and it all goes in. So the 90s, I can remember a huge amount of completely useless information about the 90s. Yesterday I was out for a walk and I just ran through all the different sides that England had played against in the 90s, series by series. I don't even need to know that. That information has gone in pre-Google.
Yeah.
You know,
that's just one.
When you're taking information, going, well, if I don't remember this, no one will. It'll be lost to the annals. You know.
Oh, I just love the idea of you going for a walk and going through. So yes, I remember when 2 meters. I remember when social distancing was 22 yards. And I tell you what, if Malcolm Marshall or Michael Holding got within 22 yards, you were in trouble. Nothing social about that bowling. Oh, what a lovely thought! But Mark's too. Mark's too is another one. You know, Mark. We know Mark, and we like, and he loves his cricket as well. And Chris Addison loves his cricket. And I don't know. It's sort of, and then that's where the Lord's Taverners started, wasn't it? Really, it was people who were. I imagine it was the Dickie Henderson era, and they must have done sort of fun cricket dinners and testimonials and stuff like that. And they just were people, so actors and comedians who loved their cricket, and they were and said, "Why don't we make a charity? We have such a lovely time enjoying cricket. Why don't we start a charity and raise money out of our love of the game?" And that's where it all started, I guess.
And I think that, like many things that are being reappraised at the moment, you sort of think, how would you do now if things restart? What do you do? Do you think, what should you go to more dinners, or should you go to more games? What you do? What's the sort of thing about actually what can one do that's anything like this? You think, am I stood in the middle of a ballroom at some London hotel, absolutely hammered, and think, is this charity? Am I not convinced this is helping? But then at the same time, having to fend off 2 overs around the caddick, you think, this is hard work, but I hope I'm helping.
Have you had that thought yet? Because I'm thinking, well, we'll get back to audiences, we'll get back to shows, and so we'll get back soon. But suddenly thinking, I thought just yesterday, God, it could be October, November, December. It could even be next year before you and I face an audience again, because I can't see when we're worried about being within 2 meters and wearing masks. I can't see 400 people being or 1,200 people being at the Grosvenor House Hotel. So all these tables. And I did think for the first time yesterday, I thought, when am I actually going to work again? I mean, this is a very really strange sort of thing, but I suppose
I've thought that so many times in the last 20 years. It wasn't really a moment for me. I was going to be in a play at the moment.
Yes,
Royal Shakespeare Company, and that I don't see how that can, unless they say, right, it was 1,000-seater, we're going to sell 40 tickets for each show or whatever. I'm not sure the economics of that would work.
Well, I think Shakespeare, a lot of his things were he wrote for online, didn't he? He wrote I think wasn't the Merchant of Venice.
Romeo and Juliet met over Zoom.
Yes, and Merchant of Venice, that was a podcast originally, wasn't it? And
that's
then
right. It's from the This American Life people. Yeah.
But so had you actually got to Stratford, because you were going to do a season?
No, I went. I hadn't gone. No, we were 2 weeks away from getting there. We basically finished our London rehearsals, then we were going to have 2 weeks off while half the company opened Winter's Tale. And then at that point, that's when the lockdown happened. So we ran the play twice in the rehearsal room, and then that was that. And then we came back the next week, did a little bit more, and they said, "Okay, just go home." So we had a press night party the other day, 5th of May. We got together, which would have been when we opened, and we just all sort of.
Which play was it?
Comedy of Errors.
So you were just all set, Royal Shakespeare Company, Comedy of Errors, and because we talked about it when we were on tour in January, I was excited. I thought I'll come up to Stratford and see that.
Well, I'm still excited, but I'm also kind of, I'm at home and I'm
yes. A lot of people are finding, they've got children who are, I say children, but people who are at university age now, who they would never normally have this time with 19, 20, 22-year-olds in the house, and they found it quite a special time.
Yeah,
with their kids being that age.
That side of it, I'm absolutely. It's fabulous being home. No, I live in Wales, normally travelling for work, and I'm just here all the time. And I'm enjoying it. It's just that thing of just remembering that there's people, doing an awful lot of terrifying things at the moment. All we have to do is just stay where we are.
Absolutely. Well, what's the latest? It is, I think, the new slogan. It is control lives, protect the virus, and save and wash.
Dance as if no one's watching. Is that one of them?
But I mean, have you got
a Keir Starmer impression yet?
No, somebody I think.
If you did, would it be recognisable? Do you think?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, these people that they do the government press conferences, like Robert Jenrick and stuff like that. They were looking at one stage they were looking increasingly like when we got to Priti Patel and people. It looked like they were the sort of task managers in The Apprentice, that would stand there and say, "Well, we did this," and you just expected Alan Sugar's voice to say, "You haven't got a bloody clue." But it does amuse me that Jacob Rees-Mogg, they have not allowed me yet to host a government briefing because I look far too much like an undertaker. And you just imagine, and he's now saying we should get back to the House of Commons to set an example. This at a time when everyone's supposed to be social distancing. Yeah. And if you can work from home, which the House of Commons, they've been phoning in their things. So it does work after a fashion.
Right. Well, Rory, thank you very much. I've just moved the thing. I've been like that all the time. Sorry.
Is that an ironing board on your left shoulder? Move it again.
That's right.
It is. It's an ironing board. How wonderful.
Ironing board. My study is.
Is it? So is it too early to start? It's 10 o'clock in the morning.
It's not too early to have the other half, Rory. You might. Why not finish breakfast?
Okay.
But I was going to say thank you very much indeed for tuning in. We hope that you've enjoyed it. A big thank you for your support for the charity tonight. Just a reminder that we're doing this for the brilliant Lord's Taverners, whose cricket programmes are truly life-changing for disadvantaged and disabled young people throughout the United Kingdom. We end this evening with this short film, which highlights the charity's impact in the last year. Please watch it, please stay safe, and please enjoy the rest of your evening.
If I was attending these wicked sessions, I would be sitting at home and doing nothing right now, or I'd be on the streets.
We are using cricket as a tool for social inclusion. I used to see the same kids standing about in the streets, throwing about bricks. Now, what do I see them? I see them play cricket in Maxwell Park.
With the Wickets programme, what it's done is you're getting rid of the problem without criminalising the young people.
He come out of his shell, he can now interact with others, and I see a lot of confidence in him.
It's nice to know that you do have a voice and you can try and change things.
We have children here with severe autism. We also have children here with profound and multiple and complex needs.
For our kids to see that actually they can be independent, they can get outside the school gates. Without the minibus, we can't do that.
All it's given me is the chance to compete in sport, which is something I've always wanted to do and I never really thought I might get the chance to do.
It just gives you that concentration and those friends that you can spend time with.
Disability sport is amazing at bringing people together. It almost makes you grateful that you've got the disability. Yes! If somebody had said to me 2 years ago, you will see Riley playing cricket, I huffed today.
When the delivery was arrived, the kids that basically collected the kit they were so appreciative of basically what they received because it was like Christmas for them.
Equipamento que agora é só meu, vai ser o taco, vai ser meu, a luva, foi muito legal, muito bom.
It was just priceless, it doesn't have a value.
His condition that's been aided by cricket will not define who he is.
It's helped me with my anger and my relationship because I don't really have any friends outside of school.
The more connections you have, the more friends you have, because to be honest, you don't want to be on your own.
I didn't think this would ever happen, but now it is happening. And I'm getting a chance to move forward.
It's not just friends, it's family. This is family for me.
It's not just pride, it's just happiness, it's just contentment that he's got a purpose.
All we could see was what he couldn't do, whereas now we're beginning to see what he can do.
It gives everything, it means everything.